I would like you to picture your brain. Now, picture your brain wearing a yellow elf costume whilst eating spaghetti drowned in maple syrup. Feeling uncomfortable and weird? Good! Today we are diving into something your brain might find slightly tastier, the psychology behind Buddy the Elf, as played by Will Ferrell in the movie Elf. And we're doing this because it's Christmas and the movie is genuinely a top watch. Of course, I love analysing fictional characters because it gives us a perfectly preserved specimen of human behaviour that we can dissect. Similar to the groundbreaking discovery of a real man who grew up in the mountains of Spain with wolves, Buddy didn't grow up with humans. He grew up in the North Pole and was raised by elves in the movie. So, for us, he's basically a psychological case study wrapped in candy canes and Christmas cheer and a whole lot more. Besides the fact that he thinks syrup is a food group, we do have fascinating lessons in identity formation, attachment theory, cultural adaptation, family systems, and the science of spreading joy. In fact, all the narrative elements that make Elf such a good movie and provide the basis for all the jokes are setups created by psychological underpinnings. Underneath the sugar-coated exterior, Buddy's story touches on some fundamental aspects of human nature, like how do we maintain authenticity in a world that often demands conformity? So when we step back and start being a little bit philosophical, we can see that Buddy's journey from the North Pole to New York City is actually like watching a textbook on developmental psychology come to life, and instead of dry academic language, we get Will Ferrell in yellow tights. So, hello and welcome to the show with me, Sam Webster Harris, diving into the psychology of everything and the psychology of Elf, and hopefully coming away with some practical ideas for your own life. So grab a cup of the world's best cup of coffee ever, and let's explore what happens when developmental psychology meets some Christmas magic.
It's nice to meet another human who shares my affinity for elf culture.
Before we get into the analysis, I'll give you a quick recap of the film's premise if you haven't watched it in a while or have never watched it, and I'll try not to give too much away. The story begins with history's most casual child abduction. A baby in an orphanage crawls into Santa's sack and he ends up being taken back to Santa's workshop in the North Pole. Papa Elf, displaying what can only be described as questionable judgment, decides this is fine and adopts the baby orphan. 30 years later, the baby, which is Buddy, has been raised as an elf and hasn't worked out why he's 3 times bigger than everybody else around him. He starts to worry about the fact that his giant hands are useless for making toys like all the other elves, and one day he freaks out when he hears the other elves mocking him for how clearly human he is.
Not an elf. Of course you're not. You're 6'3" and had a beard since you were 15.
Papa Elf comes to the rescue and he sits the giant Buddy on his own tiny little lap, and he tells Buddy about his real father who lives in New York City and doesn't actually know that Buddy exists. So Buddy goes to New York where he has no idea about anything. He treats revolving doors like amusement park rides, he believes every marketing slogan he sees, and takes things very literally. Like if he was to read that Red Bull gives you wings, he would be ready to jump right off the nearest rooftop. In fact, in the movie, Buddy commits multiple health code violations using maple syrup, he starts a war with a mall Santa, and he turns basically every available surface into a Christmas decoration. Yet somehow, and this is the real Christmas miracle of the movie, his pure, unfiltered enthusiasm starts to make everyone else look like they are the weird ones for not singing in public or not believing in the best of other people around them. So the undertones of the movie, I think, do really teach us the value of appreciating the world around us and looking at it with a much more positive eye and a general joy and cheer in our steps. And if you are wondering what movies to watch this year, I did rewatch the movie this week, and honestly, even though it's 20 years old now, it is still a cracker. I watched it with my partner, who was a bit skeptical as to what the hell this movie would be about, and she also loved it. And she loved it despite having never heard of it before. So moving on now to some psychology. Let's start at the start and talk about baby humans. Normally, they get picked up by their parents, they learn human things, they become bigger humans that understand how things like doors work. Now, although Buddy doesn't receive a normal education in life, he does get consistent love from his caregiver. When we watch baby Buddy being taken in by Papa Elf, it's not just a cute Christmas movie moment, we are seeing what psychologists call secure attachment formation in process. Every time Papa Elf responds to baby Buddy's needs, he was building Buddy's belief that the world is safe and that he is loved. In most ways, as Buddy grows up, he is downloading elf software into his human hardware, which causes many of his problems. But as we often see in life, our weaknesses are inherently linked to our strengths. And when it comes to being human, Buddy does have no cultural baggage, no societal pressures, and just pure unconditional acceptance and support. So the result is a human with elf levels of enthusiasm, unconditional positive regard for others, and zero cynicism. So it's a bit like he's been programmed with mostly psychological best practices, even if they did come wrapped in pointy candy canes. And here we can now start talking about identity. Imagine that you spent your whole life thinking you were a penguin, let's say. You waddle around, eat fish, hang out with other penguins. Life's great. Then one day, someone tells you that you're actually a giraffe. And that's basically what happens to Buddy, except with elves and humans. And he gets his entire identity drop-kicked onto another planet. The issue is that although he doesn't fit in as an elf, he also doesn't then fit in as a human. It's a somewhat similar experience to third culture kids who are brought up in a new land and aren't ethnically the same as those people who have lived there for thousands of years. Yet if the child then returns to their racial homeland as an adult, they clearly didn't grow up the same way as all the locals did there, and they find themselves in a grey zone of not feeling truly at home where they live or where their parents came from. And then there's the other thing with identity, and that's how it develops, which is in stages. Normal humans climb through each stage like rungs on a ladder as we go from being a toddler to child to adolescence to finally an adult. But Buddy, as he enters the world of humans, is somehow on all the rungs of the ladder at once. He's an adult, he's a teenager, and he's a toddler. So he has a lot going on in this movie. His elf life doesn't fit, he's learning what it means to be a human and mostly getting it wrong, he doesn't understand his identity, he's learning to adapt to New York, and he's trying to connect with his new family. Now, for the average person, this would be a very overwhelming circumstance to find yourself in, especially when your long-lost dad initially rejects you and you're just thrown out on the street. But instead of being angry or sad when things go wrong, Buddy has this amazingly positive coping strategy where he believes that once people will see things differently, then it will all work out. He has incredible faith that people do just make mistakes and it will be all right in the end. And this is a huge driving force that lets him brush off problems with ease, because he fundamentally believes in the goodness of people. And it does make you wonder what the rest of us would be like if we had more faith in people when they make mistakes, instead of quickly getting angry at them or judging them. Just saying, as it's Christmas, we could all chill out and be nice to each other. Anyway, the arrival of Buddy in New York does serve somewhat as a powerful metaphor for maybe what Carl Jung said as the confrontation with the shadow of the self. But in this case, not the shadow of Buddy's own darkness, but paradoxically, the shadow of the mundane human reality that casts itself across his positive elf view of the world. And this is perhaps most exemplified by his father. Narratively, the writers, of course, chose to model Buddy's father on the prototypical Scrooge-type character. He works too hard, he doesn't spread love or joy to anyone, he only cares about making money. And money, of course, is a concept that Buddy doesn't even understand and hasn't heard of. So it's really nice to see how their values clash, and it brings to the surface questions of what is actually important in our lives. So, sticking with the topic of identity, it's interesting to see how people's identities change as they adapt to new environments. And often when they find environments confusing, we can see them go through 4 stages of adjustment. In the movie, we see a perfect example of this when Buddy thinks the real Santa is visiting the store he works in. He's excited that finally there's going to be something and someone he can understand in this crazy world. And in stage 1 of culture shock, we have what's called a honeymoon period, where we still have expectations of understanding something. When Buddy hears about Santa, he's like, I know him! Yes!
Ah! Oh my God! Santa here? I know him!
And then we have stage 2 of culture shock, which is frustration. In the movie, he realizes that Santa isn't the real Santa, and he gets very angry and accuses him of sitting on a throne of lies.
You sit on a throne of lies.
It's a great moment that really exemplifies Buddy's entire frustration at all the stupid things that are going on in this world that he doesn't understand. Then there's stage 3, adjustment, where Buddy starts to learn to work with others in the store. He works in the mailroom, he befriends his stepbrother in a stable fight, and they decorate the house together. And then you finally have stage 4, which should be about acceptance. When most people experience culture shock, they try to adapt and suppress their original cultural behaviours to fit in with their new culture. But Buddy doesn't do this, he does the opposite. He maintains his full elf protocol whilst also learning about human behaviours. And what we have in the movie is that the biggest transformation is actually not of Buddy himself at all, but of the environment and the people around him who adapt to him. When Buddy starts spreading his elf-like joy through the concrete jungle of New York, he demonstrates an alternative form of cultural adaptation, which is to not be changed by your environment, but to change your environment yourself through your own unwavering expression of your personal, authentic nature. Now, of course, that isn't always a good strategy, and sometimes you can be very rude and offensive by ignoring people's customs. But if you value joy and connection, and you are in a place where people don't look out for each other and the society is structured to, well, bring you down, well, in these cases, it can really pay off to lift other people up. And to understand how this works, we can move from the topic of identity to social psychology and look at the theory of social contagions. Social contagion is defined as the spread of behaviours, attitudes, and affect through crowds and other types of social aggregates from one member to another. And a quick side note is that teenagers are the most prone of all humans to social contagion because they can be especially susceptible to peer influences, and this of course gets amplified by things like social media. Anyway, back on topic, we want to look at what Buddy does in social interaction and how it infects others. Firstly, when we consider the reinforcing nature of social interaction, we can observe that there's often an intricate dance of unwritten rules and unstated expectations that govern our behaviour, how we greet each other, how we ask for each other's time, how we eat our food, etc. When someone tries to dance the dance of these formalities and hasn't learned the normal steps, they should, usually, make a mess. But if, like Buddy, they can move with perfect authenticity to their own internal rhythms, it can sometimes work out and influence the dance moves, if you will, of the people around them. Like somebody in a club who just moves in a completely weird, bonkers way to everyone else. But if they just stick with it and have the confidence, sometimes other people just join them and start doing the odd dance that they are doing. Now, conventional theory of mind, to sound like I'm smart, well, that suggests that social success would require a sophisticated understanding of other people's mental states, empathy, expectations, etc. But Buddy's interactions suggest that maybe this isn't so essential and that there are some more fundamental alternatives, that perhaps just showing authentic enthusiasm can transcend this need. When Buddy gets excited to tell a stranger what he's up to, it's not always a deficit of social understanding as much as a pure expression of personal congruence. It's the state when someone's internal experience and external expression aligns perfectly, which is actually quite rare these days. Of course, we see it in kids, and we don't get angry at a toddler for saying something potentially offensive about someone's weight or colour, because we know they're just curious and speaking their thoughts, and they don't mean anything mean. A big problem for us as adults, though, is we learn to stop showing our emotions and we learn to start hiding them instead, to the point that we can't even explain what our emotions are to others with ease. So looking at this, I would say that Buddy's violations of social norms are not really violations, because getting excited to meet people and hug them, sing with others, run around revolving doors repeatedly, they're more of a transcendence of artificial social constraints and pressures that we place on ourselves as adults, and these rules only exist in our minds. There's no rule of physics that proves you can't genuinely get excited to meet someone new and hug them or sing loudly as you walk to work. These are totally available options to you if you were to take them. And when we watch the movie, the emotional contagion that follows in Buddy's wake, it really hints that beneath our carefully constructed social facades does lie a deeper yearning for authentic connection and self-expression. And honestly, after watching it, I have been singing out loud in public more often, just for fun, and it's kind of enjoyable. And I would say there's something about Buddy's unfiltered enthusiasm that dissolves people's social defenses, not because they're overwhelmed, but because they do just like having fun, and we don't need to be serious all the time. And looking at it like this, I'd say that Buddy's social interactions go from feeling like silly anecdotes to genuinely being quite inspiring. Why not challenge your fundamental assumptions of your own social behaviours?
Sorry I can't ride with you the rest of the way up, but this is where my dad works. Well, have a good time. Oh, I forgot to give you a hug.
Why are you smiling like that?
I just like to smile. Smiling's my favorite.
Is it really Buddy failing to understand social conventions, or is it us who have become too attached to them? Well, find out more after a very quick ad break to talk about some of our sponsors that keep the show running, and then we'll be back to talk about neurodivergence, joy, and family systems. Alrighty, as promised, on to neurodivergence and brains doing brain things. Now, if you follow much pop psychology these days, you might impulsively want to slap an autism sticker on Buddy for his lack of understanding of other people's emotions, or his repetitive, compulsive behaviours, or perhaps his incredibly specific obsessions. But that would ignore the fact that Buddy also has a huge love of people, and in many ways he's much more of an extroverted social butterfly than perhaps someone who would be comfortable alone with a very regular routine. Buddy doesn't get fazed at all by all the chaos and change in New York, and he just takes it in his stride without a beat, so clearly not autistic. Another impulse we might have would be to slap an ADHD sticker on him, because he seems to have the attention span of a toddler and can be instantly distractible by shiny things. And then, as is with the paradox with ADHD, he can also have hyperfocus and spend all night decorating a department store with Christmas vibes and building Lego castles and things. However, I would say this would still be too early to say anything like that, because he is in many ways still in the toddler stages of development in the human world, and I'd say we just don't have anywhere near enough evidence of true pure ADHD, considering how many other potential factors are going on claiming his attention span. And in general, he has grown up in such wildly different circumstances to a normal human, it would be very hard to prescribe any classically neurodivergent behaviour on him. Yes, his emotions can range from wild euphoria to panic and sadness, but he is possibly just a bit sensitive and otherwise just very, very naive in a world he doesn't yet understand.
You did it! Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee. Great job, everybody. It's great to meet you.
Fundamentally speaking, he has a human brain that's been running an elf operating system his entire life. And when humans experience any change, we can be very hypersensitive to the differences. For example, I'll talk about myself. I used to live in London, and when I'd sit on the train, I would think it's kind of funny how basically everyone is all on their phones when they're waiting, and it would enter my brain as strange, but I'd move on. Then in 2018, I spent a whole month living in a jungle in Tasmania without any technology at all. It was at this event that's a bit of an experiment in human living, where we basically all lived like apes, super primitive, a lot of nudism going on, half the time you're just playing games or doing yoga or making food and telling stories. And after having a whole month adjusting away from modern life, it really made me see humans as quite animalistic creatures when you strip away all our modern accessories that give us this illusion of something superior. In the same way that the packaging of meat in the supermarket detaches us from the fact that we're just eating bits of animal, the packaging of our human lives these days detaches us from what we really are, which is still animals. And so, after this whole month away adjusting to a more natural human state, when I first got on a train after a month away and saw rows upon rows of humans with a little screen in front of their face, it did really hit me just how weird it is. And I felt like I was looking at a herd of apes in a metal box, staring at these very distracting screens without any control of their attention or clue as to what else they should be thinking about. And it also just hit me how much of a sensory overload our modern environment is. Just the music on your headphones, adverts everywhere. They were so intense when you've lived with a much quieter sensory environment. And a big city like New York is a massive sensory overload with so much going on that you really have to adjust your volume levels to dull it all out just to get by and get through your life. It's kind of a sad reality of humans and hedonic adaptation that we do live in a truly crazy and magical world that at a day-to-day level we find remarkably unremarkable. So yes, in the movie, Buddy does behave very differently, but he was brought up to be hyper-focused on Christmas, toy making and joy. So when we look at Buddy and try to analyse his differences and potential neurodivergence, yes, he does behave differently, but he was brought up to be hyper-focused on Christmas, toy making and joy. His literal interpretation of things is not very surprising when you consider that kids also take things very literally when they're told about things they don't know. His hyper-focus on Christmas is definitely related to his 30 years of upbringing with elves whose lives are defined by making toys, and his heightened sensory processing does make sense in the novelty of New York, and the fact that we see him mostly finding joy in the unexpected is more a reminder to us to look for positive things rather than to stick a weirdo sticker on him for being just a positive person. So I would suggest, if anything, we have something to learn about joy from Buddy rather than labelling him. So let's transition into the psychology of joy and wonder. When we take everything we know about positive psychology and stuff it into yellow elf stockings, things do get kind of interesting. Most adults approach life with a huge portion of their brain power going towards cynicism and seeing the downsides of their situation or potential risks in future outcomes. In fact, we see risk everywhere, and if there is something good, we get used to the good thing instantly and take it for granted. Whereas Buddy doesn't have this cynicism. He doesn't get scared of things if he can instead have wonder, and he doesn't get bored of things that he enjoys, and he remains grateful for them. And when we look at this concept of our cynicism versus his lack of it, I think the film does a perfect manifestation of this idea, with the idea that Santa's sleigh used to be able to run fine just on the public's belief in Christmas. Yet in the movie now, the world doesn't believe in miracles anymore. The sleigh needs an engine to fly. Of course, when Buddy hears about this, he finds this news crazy that people don't believe in Santa.
A lot of people down south don't believe in Santa Claus.
What? Who do they think puts all their toys under the tree?
Well, there's a rumor floating around that the parents do it.
It's just a really tongue-in-cheek moment that represents our own cynicism in a fun way and plays it back to us. Now, a nice thing about psychology is that it has proven to us that maintaining a childlike wonder and playfulness into adulthood correlates with much better problem-solving abilities, reduced personal stress, and increased creativity. And so, of course, if we look at the reason why the hell I'm making this episode about the intricate psychology of a made-up human who thinks he's an elf, well, that's just to show the depth of curiosity that we can have in a silly movie that we take for granted. Instead, I can show us the wonder that we can have for anything when we step back and look for it. In general, as adults, what we often dismiss as childish play can actually be fundamental to human psychological well-being. If you tickle your coworker, surprise your partner, or pull down your friend's trousers sometimes, that's maybe good for you. Making jokes when things go wrong is the secret of resilience and being able to have fun. These days, we spend a lot of time complaining about our ADHD problems and dopamine addictions, but a big correlation with the ability to get into the flow state is your ability to experience joy and have fun. So when we see Buddy obsess over making Christmas decorations, he's easily controlling his concentration and focus because he enjoys it and he loves what he's doing. Now, the lesson here for us non-elf humans, well, maybe we don't need to put syrup on our spaghetti, but finding moments of pure unironic joy can be much more valuable than our cynical adult brains want to admit. And I know that I always take any opportunity to hate on the concept of manifesting, but a brilliant idea that Buddy shows us is that if you approach life with enough genuine wonder for it, the world actually becomes genuinely more wonderful. And so that's something I think we should all try to practice and, yes, manifest in our lives. Now, another nice thing from the film we can talk about is family systems. In the movie, Buddy completely invades his father Walter's family. And we have this thing called family systems, where in a family we fall into patterns of interaction and roles. Changing just one part of a family system can change everything. And in this regard, Buddy is a complete disruptor, but in a good way. As I said earlier, Walter represents a bit of a Scrooge character, and he shows some very rigid patterns of emotional avoidance and mostly avoids his emotional responsibilities to instead focus on work, and is actually quite absent in his son's life. And when Buddy arrives, he's a bit like a joy virus that forces the entire system to reconfigure. Walter really resists Buddy in every way, but as his son starts to make friends with Buddy and his wife starts to look up to Buddy, Walter can't ignore Buddy anymore as an idiot. And in fact, Walter starts to become the one who looks silly when he doesn't sing Christmas songs or care about having fun. And so what we witness is Walter's journey from emotional unavailability to expressing authentic connection with others, and it really demonstrates the transformative power of destabilizing a family system's defensive patterns. And if you're interested, I had to say that sentence about 12 times because we have authentic connection demonstrates the transformative power of destabilizing a family system's defensive patterns, which is a lot of big and complicated words for my small, uncomplicated brain. But anyway, back to the show. I just thought you'd like to know. Now, when Walter finally accepts Buddy, we're watching what attachment theorists call earned secure attachment. It's a bit like watching a frozen lake thaw during a time lapse. A lesson for us here is that we do often blame our family for their actions and our resulting behaviours around them. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy to change your relationships, but if you do have a family member that brings you down, as it's Christmas, you can try and put in that work to be positive yourself and don't blame your own emotions on them. Certainly not saying it's easy or that anything is your fault, but family systems can change for the better with a powerful enough destabilizing force, and joy is a pretty great force to bring to the table if that's something you want to try. Regardless, I do hope you have a wonderful Christmas and maybe get to watch Elf this year or another Christmas movie. And either way, I would encourage you to add a whole new level of curiosity and depth of thought and wonder to the experience, because you can.
Sorry, I ruined your lives and crammed 11 cookies into the VCR.
Right, so what have we learned this episode? Well, good movies are often based on fascinating psychology experiments, like what would happen if we raised a human as an elf? It's just the premise of a movie, but it's actually just as fun to look into the psychology of these great narrative setups. By doing that, we learned about attachment theory and the parenting styles of Papa Elf, as well as disrupting your family systems with joy that can alter attachment styles of potential Scrooge characters around us. We've learned about things like identity development and the fact that being yourself is scientifically good for you. We have also found that authentic enthusiasm is 10 times better than following standard social programming, and that we really shouldn't take what we're used to so seriously. We've generally found that being different isn't the same as being deficient when it comes to neurodiversity, and we shouldn't rush to label people that come across as odd when perhaps we could be the weird ones. And then, best of all, I think, is that we should definitely try to cultivate more childish wonder. It is such a healthy, nutritious medicine for our brain and soul. So maybe try to schedule some breaks for awe and wonder in between your adulting sessions whenever you get the chance. So in the style of Buddy the Elf, let's sign off with some enthusiasm. Oh my goodness, can you believe just how much amazing psychology we've learned today? The best part is that spreading joy isn't just about Christmas, it's about making the whole world better. One smile, one hug, and one spontaneous dance party at a time. Remember, authentic happiness is contagious. Wonder is wonderful for your brain, and the best way to improve your mental health is, of course, singing out loud for all to hear. Isn't psychology magical? Now, I hope you have a wildly wonderful Christmassy Christmas. And if you do want to write a raving review of the podcast, that would certainly help my own Christmas cheer. But if you don't, that's also totally excellent, and I'm very happy for you anyway. Now, as we end up the episode, you might not want to be putting maple syrup on your spaghetti, but whatever you do, please don't stop believing in the magic and power of authentic happiness and joy and wonder, because it is all around you, and you totally deserve to have some this Christmas. And with that, Merry Christmas.